Hey there, Ancient History. This is Mr. Moldenhauer, and I'm going to be showing you today this little presentation. This is going to be our presentation on the rise of civilization in ancient China. This is Chapter 3, Section 4. What I'd really encourage you guys to do is to have your notes out, and you're taking notes on these slides just like we would in class. If I'm moving a little too quick, well, this is a YouTube video. You can go backwards, and you can just review it again. So we're going to go through the rise of civilization in ancient China here and learn a few things about it. Here we go. So the first question I kind of want you guys to think about is, do you have a favorite sports dynasty? What makes them great? A sports dynasty. So, I mean, I don't have a chance to listen to your responses here, so I'm just going to name a few of mine. I mean, if you think of great sports dynasties, you can think of maybe the Golden State Warriors a few years ago with Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green. They're winning titles over and over again. Obviously, if you go back a little bit further, back into my day, you've got the Bulls, 6 championships, Jordan, Pippen, the other parts that went along with that. A dynasty that wins title after title. You can go with the 49ers back in the 90s, who were winning a lot of titles. There's all kinds of dynasties, sports dynasties, that have won over and over again. What makes them great? Teamwork. The idea that they've won a lot of championships over and over again. Well, what we're going to be looking at is some Chinese dynasties. In fact, we'll be getting through 4 of them. This particular lesson, we're going to focus on the first 2 major Chinese dynasties and what made them great. We've got our objectives here. We're going to be understanding how geography influenced early Chinese civilization. That's always where we start, right? Every time we always look at the land and how does the land affect the civilization. Then we're going to be analyzing how Chinese culture took shape under those first 2 dynasties, the Shang dynasty and the Zhou dynasty. Yes, this right here is Zhou dynasty. That's how you pronounce it. I looked it up. Trust me, guys. All right, next, we got describe the religious and belief systems that developed in early China. It's hard to say they're actually religions, but they are belief systems started by a couple of Chinese philosophers that we will look at, and then we'll be looking at some early achievements in China. Now, the terms and people. Big reminder again, make sure that you do take the time to put these terms and people into your notes. You know how to do that. I'm definitely going to stress doing it the digital way now, because it's going to be a lot tougher if we're doing this online for a bit, for you to be able to show me your notes on paper. In fact, I'm going to really stress I want you doing these digitally. That way you can just simply share your notes with me, and I'll be able to get them and get those grades in the book. So terms, you can see a number of these different terms and people that we will be going through while we go through the notes here. Here's your focus question. What characteristics define the civilization that developed in China under its early rulers? What are some characteristics? What are some things that we're going to be able to see about early Chinese culture? Of course, we are going to be looking at the way that rivers play a factor, not unlike many of the other cultures we've talked about. We've talked about Mesopotamia, you got rivers. Ancient Indus people, we've got the river there. Ancient Egyptian, we have the river there. This is very similar in Chinese culture. And the devotion to duty to ensure that society runs smoothly, we're going to talk about how that played a really big factor in China's history. All right. So if we look here, we're talking about geography influencing Chinese culture. This is the very first Chinese culture right here in the green, and you can see the purple outline is the second Chinese dynasty that we're going to be talking about, the Shang and then the Zhou dynasty. Both of them pretty much start in the exact same area, and Chinese culture was very isolated from outside groups. There's reasons for that, and that reason is basically 100% geographical. It has to do with the land. I'll show you a few things here. First of all, you've got the Gobi Desert. The Gobi Desert is this area of China right here. And the Gobi Desert is one of the driest deserts in the world. It's not always hot in the Gobi Desert. It's hot and it's cold, but it's definitely not a place you want to go. Some places in the Gobi Desert haven't rained in years and years and years. This is not a place that's very easy to get through, and this is absolutely a barrier that prevented anyone from this area over here getting into China. China was split and divided because of the Gobi Desert. The next place that you're talking about is mountains. Obviously, we've got the Himalaya mountains right here, some of the biggest mountains in the entire world, highest mountains in the entire world. You're not getting through there, okay? So the people of India are not getting to China, and so there's really not a lot of interaction there. You've got the Kulung Mountains right here. Okay, again, this is a split. You're not going to get into China. This part of China right here is very much divided. And then you have the Pacific Ocean, the sea, South China Sea, the East China Sea, all part of the Pacific Ocean. That's, of course, going to block China through this way here. The ocean is going to cut off China in this entire location here. And then down here, this part of China right here that I'm circling right now, this part of China was very thickly, densely forested, rainforests. And if you know anything about rainforests, rainforests can be tougher to get through than even mountains, especially back in those times. A rainforest was complete maze. It was so dense, you're not going to get through it. So if you look at this green area and purple area right in here, it was completely set apart. There's no way that the Chinese are going to be able to really communicate with many other people. It was a very isolated people, and this is going to affect Chinese culture quite a bit. There is one area, looks like, that you can sort of get through to China, and that would be this area right here. It's kind of the one open spot, and we're going to talk about Chinese culture and what happened to sort of close off this one opening that would allow people to get into China through this direction right here. All right, as we talked about, rivers are very, very big deal in ancient China. The Huang River is also known as the Yellow River, and it's known as the Yellow River because of the soil. When it floods in ancient China, and certainly did that, the soil was a yellowish tan color, and with all that loess soil, that what it's called, that goes into the water took on kind of a color there that was very very yellowish. What I'd like you to do is just take a second to click on this link right here, and you can actually see the Yellow River in China. Watch a little clip of the river and see the power that this river has. Of course, this river is powerful and dangerous at times, but it's also extremely important because it, of course, gives nourishment to the people. It allows them to travel on it when it's not flowing like this. It also overflows and puts mud, this loess soil, this loess sediment. It makes the soil very productive, able to farm. Obviously provides water to drink and water for animals and things like that. So rivers are critical in China, just like the other places. However, this river is also sometimes called the River of Sorrows, because when it did overflow, it could be extremely unpredictable, and sometimes so unpredictable it would result in deaths and destruction in people's villages. So I encourage you guys to watch that video now. Click on the link right here and watch the video. So in these valleys of the Huang and the Chang rivers, this is where civilization really starts in ancient China. There were harsher climates away from the river valleys, and in these places you pretty much had your nomadic people who are going to raise animals, and these nomadic people were oftentimes more warlike. Again, I'm going to compare this to ancient India, which we studied recently. The people who are farmers were typically more peaceful. The people who were nomadic were typically more warlike. And sometimes these warlike people would attack the Chinese cities, pillage them, take some of their crops and other goods. And that was something that Chinese people had to learn how to deal with because of these nomadic people that would sometimes attack. Sometimes when these outsiders would attack, again, I'm going to tie this to ancient India because it's similar. When these outsiders invaded, sometimes these outsiders would see the lifestyle that was going on inside the city and compare it to what they were doing and realize that, they wanted a piece of that. Sometimes these nomads would eventually intermingle with the city people, and they would become absorbed into the culture and become part of the Chinese culture, giving the Chinese, more diversity. So let's get to about 1766 BC, goes to about 1122 BC. This is about a 600-year period of time. This period of time is when the very first Chinese dynasty starts, called the Shang dynasty. You can see the Shang dynasty right here. It's got some different dates here, but the general idea of it being about 4,000 years ago when it started is pretty accurate. The dynasty was organized by clans, so family groups are really important. Most of the members of the Shang dynasty are peasants. The very biggest group that work in this dynasty are the people who are doing all the dirty work. They're leading the grueling lives. They're working the fields. Almost all of their income, almost all of their crops end up going to people above them. They don't get a lot of benefit from it. In the cities, life was a little bit better. If you lived in a city, odds are you were an artisan or some sort of a worker that had more skill. And because of that, your life would be a little bit better. Some of the really good things that we see from the Shang dynasty, some of the best products that are left are bronze. Bronze was the primary metal that was used by the Chinese at this time. And there's some really good artwork and metal work that remains in bronze. One example of that is this excavation site right here. Fuhao. I'm probably completely murdering that pronunciation. But what I'd like you to do right now is just take a look at this picture really carefully and look at some of the items that were found here. Try to think of some things that you can tell about ancient Chinese culture, especially the Shang dynasty, just by looking at what was unearthed in this area. Do you have any guesses about what this might be? Some things you might notice. Now, I'm just going to show you a few things since I would love to be hearing from you right now, but I'm hoping you're looking at it carefully. A few things that I noticed, first of all, are if you look in this corner here and right here, even over here and over here, there's bones. These are definitely people who have people who are buried here. And that's one thing that I'm noticing right away. Second of all these different pots and articles right here, if you don't know, you might look at these and think these are clay. They're not. These are actually all bronze. So you can see some of the really detailed work that was done in bronze. You can see some different pitchers, receptacles, pots, some chests, even some weapons right over here. This is really, really cool, I think. And all these different things that were made during this time, which shows you the skill level and some of the things that they had. This would be an important thing to make sure that you have in your notes. This is the first time you're seeing it. These are the dynasties of ancient China that we're going to be specifically looking at. The Shang dynasty, the Zhou dynasty, the Qin dynasty, and the Han dynasty. That's the way you pronounce those different dynasties. This is Qin, kind of like China, and the Zhou, the Shang, and the Han dynasties. And you can see their dates here. So we'll be looking at all four of these dynasties. This particular lesson, mostly just focusing on the Shang and the Zhou. So the Shang dynasty ends in about 1122 BC. It ends because of a rebellion led by, well, the next dynasty, the Zhou warriors. And the Zhou, they come in and they claim a divine right to rule. They say God gave them the right to rule. God gave them the authority to rule. And they called that authority the mandate of heaven. This is basically the rights of the gods to let them rule. This is going to be very important because in the Chinese dynasties, they're basically going to believe that the gods give them the right to rule. A little bit of a comparison maybe to Egypt here and the pharaohs, but the Chinese people would sometimes feel that the gods had given up on a particular dynasty, or they had lost their mandate of heaven. They had lost their right. And if that ever happened, that would be the time to overthrow the government and to bring on a new dynasty. This is going to be an important thing. You don't have to necessarily write every single issue here, but you do need to understand the idea of the dynastic cycle. This is basically a pattern that would happen over and over and over again in ancient China. This is called the dynastic cycle. The Chinese would argue that this reflects heaven's judgment of good and bad governments. So heaven looks at the government, judges whether they're good or bad, and kind of allows this cycle to happen. So I'm going to start at a new dynasty. This is where we're going to take a look here. The first step of the dynastic cycle is a new dynasty. So a new dynasty comes in. Things weren't going so well. Okay, a new dynasty comes in, restores the peace, gets things organized again. They get new officials in charge. They give land back out to the peasants again, so the peasants get their land back, because odds are they had their land taken away before that. They build canals, irrigation, roads. They make China run well again. They repair the walls. They protect you. All these good things that the new dynasty is doing. So this continues for several generations. For several generations, China continues to go well until it starts to become what's called an aging dynasty. During the aging dynasty, the emperors, they're neglecting their job. They're not doing their duties anymore. There starts to be corrupt officials, and the government doesn't do anything. These corrupt officials take things, they abuse the people. The emperor starts to lose control of his own government. So he starts to lose control of provinces that are a little bit further away. The emperor wants lots of luxuries. So how's he going to get his luxuries? Heavily taxing the people. Heavily taxing the people. There were some Chinese emperors who at times would tax the people more than 70% of what they had, leaving almost nothing for themselves. And they allow the defensive walls to decay. In other words, invaders can come in. This is called an aging dynasty. So the people look at this, and the other nobles in the government look at this, and some of the people maybe on the outside of the empire look at this, and they say, you know what, this dynasty is losing the mandate of heaven. This aging dynasty has lost the gods' approval. Another sign that maybe that has happened is there starts to be problems. Things like floods, famines, earthquakes, invasions, bandits, and revolts. Now, all these things could happen whether or not God says anything. I mean, these things can happen at any time. But when things start to go bad, people blame these things on the dynasty. And so, with all of these things, a lot of times a revolt or bandits would result in a new dynasty claiming the mandate of heaven and starting all over again. So this is the pattern that happens in ancient China. I want to make sure that you in your notes have the three parts and then at least some of the description underneath each one that shows how this worked. All right, so this next dynasty after the Shang dynasty, the Zhou dynasty that comes in, China becomes a feudal state. Now, maybe there's a few of you who've taken medieval history, and you're going to see some similarities, quite a few actually, between European medieval history and Chinese feudalism. Feudalism is a system where you've got local lords governing their own lands, but there's one ultimate ruler in charge, an emperor or a king. After 800 BC, so a lot of time has kind of passed here, the feudal lords actually had more power than the kings did. And this is going to eventually lead to the collapse of the Zhou dynasty. I'm going to show you a little bit how that works. So this is feudalism in ancient China. You've got the king. This is the king or the emperor, the Zhou emperor in this case, who would have been in charge of all the land of China at the time, or at least what they would have called China. He owns it all. So what does he do? He can't necessarily run it all himself. So what he did is he would give land and the power to rule that smaller piece of land to a feudal shi. And a feudal shi is a lot like a noble, maybe we'd call it in ancient Europe, or a lord. And this feudal shi, he would owe the king a few things. I mean, he just got a bunch of land, so he would owe loyalty. He had to be loyal to the king. If the king called for his help, if the king was caught in a battle, the feudal shi had to bring his warriors, his army, and fight for the king. He also had people living in his kingdom, in his small little shi, and people like farmers, people like merchants, also his own warriors. What he would do is he would break up his own land and give some to the farmers, and allow the merchants to do their business, and employ the army. All of these people eventually giving things to the feudal shi, giving him food, giving him money, giving him taxes, and then he would owe some of that back to the king. The farmers, what do they get out of this? Well, they live on the land owned by the feudal shi, and they supply food, of course. Some of that food they have to give in taxes. Some of that food they get to keep and use for themselves. You've got warriors. These warriors, this army, they protect the shi. They protect the land from bandits, from other enemies that might try to attack, maybe even a different feudal shi that lives right next door. This army owes loyalty to the feudal shi, and he makes sure they're well provided for. And then, of course, you got merchants. And the merchants, they would live in a particular feudal shi, but they would also move around a lot more. The way that these people would know what was going on in other places in the empire and even outside the empire is mostly through the merchants. The merchants are going to go and trade with other places, bring back new ideas, new inventions, and new products. So I'll show you an idea here. If this is the whole Chinese empire, imagine this whole purplish thing right here being China. You've got the king's land right here. This is the emperor. This is the Zhou emperor, the king. He's got his own chunk of land that he runs himself. But he owns all of this, every bit. What he does is he splits it up and gives different pieces. You can see each one of these little different pieces represents a different piece that he gives to a feudal shi. The feudal shi of this piece is in charge of his own warriors, merchants, and farmers. This feudal shi is in charge of his warriors, merchants, and farmers, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. And there were probably way more than what this little diagram is trying to show you. But every one of these feudal shis would owe the king money every year, tribute, kind of like tax money. And they would also owe him loyalty. So if the king ever needed to fight against something else or someone else, these feudal shis would bring all of their warriors together and fight with the king. That was the way it was supposed to work. Of course, sometimes a feudal shi might fight against another feudal shi and try to increase his land. That sometimes also happened. So there was a lot of ins and outs to Chinese feudalism, but this is at least a basic idea of how it went. The next thing I got to talk about here is two of the big philosophies. You could call them religions, but they're more of a philosophy. They're more of a way of looking at the world. And two very important minds that come up, two very important people that come up in China at this time, almost at exactly the same time too. One of them is named Confucius. You probably heard of him before. Confucius was famous for his wise sayings. And he started during this Zhou dynasty. He was very concerned with worldly goals, making worldly progress. One of the things that was very much the most important to him was called filial piety. What is filial piety? Well, that's respect. That's respect for your parents. That's respect for authority figures like the government. This is basically what he taught, is that you had to have this level of respect for those people in charge of you. It's the highest principle in the world, is to have respect for your parents, respect for your government. His teaching reflected this belief in the yin and the yang, the balance between two different forces. And in order for you to stay in balance, you needed to have this filial piety, this respect. Uh, so, a few of the famous sayings of Confucius: it doesn't matter how slowly you go, so long as you do not stop. It's kind of wise, right? Go slow, just don't, like, slow and steady wins the race. Before that was even said, I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. Okay, so what is this saying? This is saying, what's the best way to learn? To do it. Hands-on learning is the best. If you see something, that's great. If you hear something, you're going to forget it. You need to do whatever you want to do, and that will help you to really understand. Choose a job you love, and you will never have to work another day in your life. I love this philosophy. I love this statement. I chose a job pretty well because I love it, and now it's like I don't even have to work. It's great. You should all do that too. Our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. It sounds like a good thing for a coach to say to a team. It's not that you never fall, but you rise every time you fall. See, Confucius is just full of this cool stuff that he says. Before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves. Oh, snap, Confucius. Exactly. So if you're going to try to get revenge, you ought to dig 2 graves, because you're not only going to be putting that person down, you're probably going to be getting yourself in the grave too, or yourself in trouble too. Revenge is always going to hurt both people involved. And Confucius, he's got some. Another philosopher at the same time was named Lao Tzu. And Lao Tzu lived at the same time of Confucianism as Confucius. His philosophy was called Taoism, right here, Taoism. So you got Lao Tzu, who started Taoism. And Lao Tzu, he disagreed with Confucius in pretty much most ways. First of all, Confucius loved the government. He thought you should respect the government, and the government should treat the people just like a loving father would treat his children. That was Confucius. Lao Tzu thought the government was unnatural and corrupt in many cases. He thought the very best government in the world would be one that interferes the least. So if you want to be a good government, you don't do a lot. You try to do nothing, as little as possible. That would be the best government in Lao Tzu's philosophy of Taoism. He thought the best model you should follow is not parent-children relationship model. He thought the best model is nature. Do what nature does. You know something that has a little stream that flows down perfectly. Be like a stream. That's what Lao Tzu would say. That doesn't mess up. Animals, they just do what animals are supposed to do. They follow a certain pattern, and it's right. You should mimic animals. You should mimic nature. Live in harmony with nature. Practice the virtue, Lao Tzu would say, of yielding. You never want to do too much. You want to do less. You want to be like nature. You just want to let everything be. And that's really the philosophy of Taoism. Here is just a little chart that's be good for you guys to copy down. This kind of gives you the 2 different philosophies, Confucius over here and Taoism, Lao Tzu over here, and it tells you some of the basics of each philosophy. All right, so some of the achievements that were accomplished during the time of the Shang and the Zhou dynasties. First of all, silk. Silk is a huge deal. It becomes China's most important export material. It becomes what everybody wants. They've never seen a material like this. I mean, if you compare silk to what most other people were wearing at this time, things made of animal hair like wool or linen, these things are not nearly as comfortable as silk. I mean, if any, of course, you probably felt silk before, and it's silky. You all know what silk is made out of, right? It is a material that comes from a worm. You know, the worm, it squirts it out of its backside, and this can be harvested and used actually to make a very silky, wonderful cloth. Chinese writing also appears during the time of the Shang and the Zhou dynasties. I would like you guys all please to watch this video. So you got to click on this link right here and find out what oracle bones are. I'm going to let you do that. Okay, so I want you all just to click on that link and make sure you check out what an oracle bone is and what that is. In your notes, have a little section that says oracle bones and write down some at least 2 or 3 things that you learned from this video about oracle bones. It's pretty remarkable, actually, just the way that ancient Chinese writing actually appears not written on paper right away, but written on bones. Please watch that video. As I said, it's about a 3-minute video. You're going to want to click on that link right here. And when you click on that, well, of course, you can't click on this link in YouTube. You've got to click on it. You've got to go into the actual presentation that's been shared with you on campus. If you click on that one, you'll be able to be linked to the video and you can watch it. This YouTube video, I'm just showing it to you. So hopefully you have that other tab open at the same time. And then also Chinese writing, this idea called, it's very beautiful writing in Chinese is a very beautiful writing style called calligraphy. The beautiful style of writing of Chinese, the calligraphy writing, which China becomes very famous for.